Scriptures. Numbers chapter 16, that's in the Old Testament. Love for you to join us there. And a little bit harder topic for this morning, but I think appropriate, not only for us as a church, but also teenagers as you head off to camp. I certainly had you in mind as we look at the subject matter the Holy Spirit has laid on our heart even for today. And so the title of the message is simply this: Don't be the rebel in the camp. Don't be the rebel in the camp. And so we'll jump into it here in Numbers chapter 16. Let me encourage you tonight, be back if you can, especially teenagers, parents of teens going to camp. Don't buy into the lie that, they need to stay home and pack and rest and everything like that. There's plenty of other time for that. Camp, I am saddened that camp shortened from being Monday earlier, all the way through, and even Sunday night at one point, and so forth. So there's less preaching they get to hear. So I like to use Sunday before camp to kind of stir the fire of revival in the hearts of our teenagers. They head off to camp, but also us here in our church. And so please try to be here tonight. And as I said earlier, we'll try to keep it a little more concise with all that's going on. One of the sad realities and results really, of a nation that has denied God, a nation that attempts to live apart from God, is this simple truth, is that often what happens is that society at times tolerates and even exalts rebels. Tolerates and even exalts rebels. And we certainly witness that within our own culture, even currently, right? America, unfortunately, at times in our history, the rebel has been romanticized. All I would have to say to the older generation here is James Dean and A Rebel Without a Cause from the 1950s. We romanticize rebellion, and then right after that, what happens? Well, the very next decade, we have the sexual revolution. We have things that happen and transpired after that, in which the rebel was given their day. The rebel was somewhat romanticized. The rebel was tolerated, even exalted within our culture. Fast forward to today. Today we have rebels who are highlighted by our media. They are praised, they are saluted for taking over campuses, entire parts of campuses, and in cities and different places. We look the other way when they destroy things and they cause chaos and trouble. We commend them for letting their voice be heard. We give them a response that only emboldens a rebel and gives them greater influence. We see it in our culture today. We unfortunately have seen it in our history, even as a nation. Yet, just like us, Israel too had rebels in the camp. As they traversed the wilderness, as they were following God's leading, they too experienced rebels within the camp that had a dire effect. Here in this chapter, number 16, it has to be considered one of the darkest chapters in the history of the nation of Israel. By the end of this chapter, nearly 15,000 people died. And do you know where it started? Rebellion. It starts with the rebellion in the heart of a rebel. And it just plays out from there. You see, my friend, rebels are dangerous. They can disrupt a nation. They can ruin a home. They can negatively affect a week of camp for an entire youth group. They can hurt and hinder the spirit and work of a local church. They can grossly affect the atmosphere and attitudes of an entire Christian school. They can even make a workplace a nightmare. If I were to ask some of you, you could identify at one of your workplaces, maybe the one you're currently at. A rebel who has made it tough on everybody. A rebel who causes nothing but problems and chaos and turmoil. I have seen every single one of these instances in my own life, whether it be a Christian school, a youth group, a church, a workplace. I've seen it. I've seen the rebels wreak havoc. I've seen rebels create chaos and confusion and heartache and hurt and damage other people. Yea, as a youth pastor, I've seen it at a week of camp, where one rebel can, affect the atmosphere and the spirit of everything, can ruin it, can take away from what God wants to do. You see, God understands it, and God says something very strong about rebellion and the rebel and the actions of a rebel. The verse is pretty straightforward. Saul had rebelled against what God had told him through Samuel, and Samuel told him on behalf of God that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. It means it's in rare company. rare company of things that God greatly condemns, things that cause great harm. Here in Numbers chapter 16, we are introduced to a group of rebels led by one. But there's a group of rebels. Look at verse number 1 of chapter 16. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and then Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, all the sons of Reuben, took men. Immediately, the first verse is very informative. In fact, it kind of opens the window, gives us a glimpse into the heart of a rebel. We will describe it this way. We will find, first of all, number 1, the making of a rebel. The making of a rebel. Here are some things that transpire in the heart of a rebel or in their lives that help produce a rebel, make someone, turn them into a rebel. Number 1 is unfulfilled desires and expectations. Let's start with Korah. Korah is mentioned first, and he is indeed the ringleader of this group of rebels. It's obvious from the story that is presented to us here, and even later, if we had time to look at all the words that Korah said, we would understand that he felt like he had gotten the short end of the stick in life. He was born in the wrong tribe. He wasn't getting all the things that he deserved, and he was not enjoying what he believed he was entitled to. Do you recognize that word today? Entitlement. He wasn't getting everything that he believed that he was due. He was a Levi. He was part of the group that ministered as part of the temple, yet he wanted more. He felt like he deserved more. He felt like he deserved to be someone who was in charge, that his voice was heard. And when that didn't happen, when that did not occur, you can imagine that the makings of a rebel started within his heart. No doubt the buildup of bitterness over unfulfilled desires and expectations occurred over a length of time. It really is a warning to us as we consider Korah, because it's obvious from his words that he had some expectations of what he wanted to be, that he thought God should have put him in charge, that he should have had this authority and this position and this status, and he was entitled in his mind to it. And when that didn't happen, rebellion took root, probably right alongside the root of bitterness. So the warning is for us today is don't let rebellion take root. Don't let it grow in your heart and spirit over unfulfilled desires and expectations. See, it's easy to look at someone in leadership and teenagers. I will tell you right now, it's easy to look at Pastor Tony and say, you know what, boy, he didn't make the decision I wanted. He didn't do that. Can I just be illustrate this? May I just be simplistic in an illustration? Okay, can I do that? I remember, in fact, just a few years ago, some years ago, there was a teenager in our youth group who got upset and was kind of a rebel for half the first week of camp. You know why? Because on the way down to camp, we'd had some automotive issues and things like that. That sometimes happens. Vehicle issues. And we did not get to make our normal Walmart stop. And sometimes what we do before we go to camp, we stop at Walmart and they go get some drinks and some other things, snacks and things like that. And, because a whole week, away from a grocery store is just like death. And so they had to go down. But because we were behind and needed to get to camp, we couldn't do that. Can I just tell you, a missed stop at Walmart brought out some rebels. You say, that's silly. Yeah, but it's unfulfilled expectations. And can I just tell you, I've seen just as silly things in the church. I've seen just as silly things in a workplace. I've seen just as silly things in a Christian school. Someone get upset, becoming a rebel, giving way to rebellion and stubbornness, all because when I was a youth pastor, I remember a young lady wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the trip because I stopped at the wrong fast food place. I'm serious. She basically ignored me. I found out later what the problem was, unfulfilled expectations. She thought we should have gone to this restaurant, and when I chose to go to a different one as a youth pastor, and she was upset. That's silly! Can I just tell you right now, that's how rebels made. That's how rebels made. Unfulfilled expectations, unfulfilled desires. And boy, then all of a sudden, we let that root of bitterness, root of rebellion creep up and grow. Hebrews 12:15 tells us, be careful. Don't let that root of bitterness. Guard your heart from the root of bitterness and rebellion. Can I tell you, teenager? I can guarantee you. Let me make you a promise. Pastor Tony is going to make a decision this week that you don't like. It's going to happen at camp. I guarantee it. The camp is going to make a decision you don't like. The question is this: how will you respond? Will you give a little room to rebellion? Are you going to give a little room to the root of bitterness and rebellion creeping up in your heart and life? Can I just tell you right now, teenager, before you leave your home, your parents are going to make a decision you don't like. It's going to happen. Pastor, deacon's going to make a decision, church member, you don't like. Your boss at work's going to make a decision you don't like. You expected it to go some other way. You had a desire for something else. It didn't go that way. Anywhere there's an authority. May I just tell you right now, if you live long enough as a Christian, you'll discover God will make a decision for your life that you don't desire. Something's going to happen. Something's going to transpire. You don't want it. It's going to happen in your life. Are you going to rebel against God? Because honestly, all rebellion against any authority is a rebellion against God. So what are you going to do? How are you going to handle it? Because the making of a rebel, here's Korah. Korah's looking at the situation. Who's Moses? Moses is a nobody. I should be the one in charge. Why? He takes too much on himself. I should be where he is. And rebellion begins to take root and take place in his heart. Oh, but there's more going on, okay? There's also uncontrolled ambition. Uncontrolled ambition that's kind of parallel to it. It's obvious that Korah had some leadership ability. In fact, today, modernly, we might say he had some charisma that attracted people. And boy, he had a personality. He had clear designs on being a leader. And he reached a point where he didn't care what he was leading in, good or bad. He just wanted to lead. He just wanted to influence others. And he was successful in it. You see all those other guys listed in verse 1 that we just read about? He led them all. He was the ringleader. And it didn't stop there. It wasn't just those guys, but note it, there were 250 princes, men of renown in the camp, famous men, men who had positioned themselves that followed him. Look at verse 2, that's what it tells us. And they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. Here's Korah, man. He had influence. He was a leader. Unfortunately now, because of his ambition misplaced and allowing rebellion to creep up, boy, he's leading in all the wrong ways. It says something about Korah. He not only got them to follow him, but also to take up the cause of rebellion. Look at verse 3. Notice what it says. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you. Seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. And he influenced them to action. Can you imagine? Hey, Moses. Moses. What, Aaron? Man, there's a group of guys coming this way. They don't look happy. I think I recognize a couple. I think there's Korah and Abiram and Dathan. I think they're at the front, but man, there's that prince over there and the prince of this tribe. Man, Moses, what do you think they want? I don't know, Aaron. Let's go out and meet them. Let's find out what's going on. And they walk out, and boy, they get lambasted. Notice the statements that happen. It's interesting what they say, isn't it? And I can just imagine Korah being the main speaker. He says, Ye take too much upon you. Now, there's much to take away from that. First of all is this. It's a veiled statement of him saying this. I should have a position like you. I should be a leader too. Now, he kind of couches it in the congregation, everybody in the congregation. But we know exactly who Korah is talking about, right? He's talking about himself. Very narcissistic, very self-promotion, it's all about me, very selfish. And so he's very much, you take too much upon yourself. I want to be a leader, so you. He wanted a piece of the pie. Korah wanted to be brought in on the same level of leadership. He wanted the status and the position of control. That was his ambition. And let's be honest, on some level, we all have that ambition. Our flesh wants to be the one in control. Our flesh wants to make the decision to determine things. We believe that we can do that. Sometimes you and I look at God and we say, God, I can make a better go of this thing called life than you can. What you've allowed and what you've done in my life, and we rebel against the very sovereignty and omniscience and omnipotence of God. We rebel against it. We carry that down to human authority in our lives and leaders and so forth, just as Korah did here. And before we know it, we are slowly or even quickly changing into a rebel. A rebel. And I would remind you in God's eyes, rebellion is right up there with witchcraft, idolatry. It's right up there. Can I just tell you, encourage you here, as we look at Korah, the ambition is obvious. Look at the next statement that he makes. He says this, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them. Again, a veiled statement referencing the entire congregation of people, but he's really fixated upon himself. He's saying, I can do what you are doing, Moses. I'm just as capable as you are being the one in charge. And in fact, I could probably do it better. And he's convinced the other 250 guys and the 2 or 3 guys that were with him from verse 1, he's convinced them the same thing. His ambition made him into a rebel. He wasn't alone in this rebellion. Look at verse 1 again. You see the 3 guys? Their names are Dathan, Abiram, and On. You see who they're descendants of in verse 1? This is crucial. This gives us some of the backstory. They're descendants of Reuben. Who was Reuben? Well, interestingly, Reuben was the firstborn among the brothers that made up the 12 tribes of Israel. And what happened to him? Well, honestly, he kind of got slighted when the blessings and inheritance were given out by his father, by Jacob. Judah was preferred before him, and other things happened. And so from generation to generation, something else was passed down in that generation. And this is where we get these guys part of the rebel club. Unforgiven or unforgotten offenses. You see, the descendants of Reuben were unhappy. Every time they set up camp, they were reminded of the right of the firstborn was taken from their forefather and them. The camp of Judah was placed before them in the lineup as they spread out around the temple. And they did not have the first place. Judah was given that. And so they were not enjoying the primacy they believed their tribe was due as the descendants of the firstborn. Oh, it was a decision made by God many years before, but reality was Moses was the most available embodiment of authority and leadership. So they aimed their angst at him. Because of that, they were easy pickings for the ringleader Korah who came along. He listened to their discontentment. He used that unforgiven offense or slight to build up and help make them rebels. Such a little thing that happened years before, but boy, did it make did it do something in the heart of those men. You see, you will likely never agree with or understand all the decisions of those in authority, especially the ones that affect you negatively. But beware. It's the little foxes that spoil the vines, Solomon says. I remember as a youth pastor that there was one year that there was a teenager who decided, I found out from the parents, they weren't going to camp that year. A little surprised because the teenager had gone many years, siblings had gone too. And so I remember going to the parents and asking what's going on and trying to get from that child or that teenager. There wasn't much reason given, but I finally got to the bottom of it and through talking to the parents. And here's what happened. A decision that was made the year before had got in their craw. And they'd held on to it all year, and because of that decision, they decided they weren't going to camp that year. Now, may I tell you, what do you think they missed in an entire week of camp because they allowed something to get in their craw? You say, well, Pastor Henry, well, let's just give them the benefit of doubt. Let's give Korah the benefit of the doubt. Let's give these 3 guys the benefit of the doubt. You know what that decision was? They didn't like the sports team they were placed on for camp. And because of that silly little thing that they got all worked up about, and they went back home, I'm never going to camp again because I held on to it for an entire year. And I will say this, while at camp that year, their attitude and spirit affected other people. But they made a decision that I'm not going to go along with this next year. I'm not going to camp. Such a small thing, it would seem. And yet it affected them greatly. Beware, Solomon says. It's the little foxes that spoil the vines. It's the little things. Sometimes we let them get in our crawl. Sometimes we let them bother. And boy, all of a sudden we start to get a little stubborn, a little rebellious against a boss. We get rebellious against our parents. And we get a little stubborn in obedience to what our parents say because there's a decision they made. And maybe they made the wrong decision. But we get a little rebellious. We get a little upset with it. And we allow that little fox to grow. Those disappointments, the hurts, the slights in our minds. The offenses become a spark or the root of rebellion. We don't forgive them. We don't forget them. We don't try to cover them with grace and love. What happens? They produce an environment in which we are all too quick to find fault. We express displeasure and discontentment with those in authority, and eventually we challenge and rebel against the authority. We see it all the time. And in fact, may I just tell you right now, we are teaching a generation of Americans to act like this. This is what's happening. We're producing rebels. We're producing people who don't know how to handle disappointments and things that don't go their way, slight offenses and such. The reality made these guys easy pickings simply because they had some unforgiven, unforgotten offenses as being their forefather Reuben just got slighted. And now every time we set up camp, we're reminded about how we were slighted and how we were offended. And boy, that affected them greatly. And now guess what? They're going and challenging Moses and Aaron and God himself. All because of that one thing. But as it made them easy pickings for Korah, there's something else, and I think this is quite interesting. You know what often helps and one of the big contributors in making a rebel? Unhealthy friendships. Unhealthy friendships. Don't miss this. This is good. Korah, he was of the tribe of Levi. Verse number 1 tells us, the other passages do too, or the other verses. He was specifically of the Kohathites. These other three guys in verse 1, they were of the tribe of Reuben. Okay? Now what's notable about that? Well, according to the layout plan of how they were to set up their tents and so forth in Numbers chapter 2, how the tribes were encamped around the tabernacle, we see that the Reubenites were encamped near to the Kohathites. They were neighbors. That means that as such, they were conveniently located to take one another into their counsel, to share their grievances, their rebellious thoughts and attitudes. They quickly find each other and easily influence one another. It means that Korah found a ready audience in these men for his rebellious plans as they spent time with him. And they found a sympathetic ear in Korah for their complaining and criticisms. You see, rebels are often made by, or at least encouraged through, unhealthy friendships with other rebels in the making. In fact, the Bible speaks to this quite clearly in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, we read this, and I find it interesting that it's also introduced with that statement, don't be deceived. But Dad, I can hang out with a rebel. I know that that this person doesn't obey their parents, and this person gives Pastor Tony a hard time, and this person in the school does this. But Dad, we're just friends. You know what the Bible says to that? Don't be deceived. Hey, this coworker, I know, but he's fun to hang out with. But he's always talking bad about the boss. He's always doing this, and he's always undermining what the boss is doing. But, he's fun to be around. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. Why? Evil communications corrupt good manners. It's effective. It will affect you. You hang out, you listen to them, it's going to affect you. There's a reason, verse 1, they're all together. They may have their individual things that help make them a rebel. What reality is, they encourage one another. There was an unhealthy friendship here that built that up. Can I just tell you today, if you hang out with rebels, you will become one, or you will be influenced to think and act like one. At the very least, you will become sympathetic to their wrong thinking, their wrong reasons, their wrong notions. For you youngins, here's a good saying to remind you of it. If you run with the dogs, you're going to get fleas. If you run with a rebel, it's going to influence you. It'll change you. You head off to camp this week. Can I tell you right now, listen to me, I'm going to be serious. You teenagers know I love every single one of you. I'm praying for you this week. I care about you deeply, but I'll tell you right now, you get on that bus tomorrow morning and you hear somebody acting like a rebel, stay away from them this week. Stay away from them. You go to camp, the Bill Rice Ranch, and we think everybody's there, hunk-a-dory, living for the Lord and want to do right. Oh, certainly there's a good number of them, but I'll tell you right now, as a youth pastor, it did not take but a few hours for me to see the rebels connect with each other. And those of you who've been there know what I'm talking about. Stay away from them. Don't sit next to the person who's not listening in the service. Don't sit next to a person who's always complaining about the food and complaining about the heat and complaining about this authority and this rule and that rule. Don't sit next to the rebel. It will impact you. Why? Because evil communications corrupt good manners. That's not Pastor Henry saying it. That's God saying it. Don't be deceived. Do not be deceived. It will affect you. It will rub off on you. Here is the reason that Korah had a following. And when all of these things are not dealt with biblically, they call someone to grow into a rebel. They become bold in their actions. You know what we begin to see? Not just the making of a rebel here, but we see the signs of a rebel. How do you spot one? How do I go to camp and I see, okay, that person's a rebel? How do I go into a church and say, you know what? That person may be a church member, but they're a rebel. I go to work and I say, how do I know that this person is a rebel? Number one, we've seen it already, but let's elaborate quickly. The rebel attacks the one in leadership or authority. Remember those words we read a moment ago that Korah came and said to Moses? Ye take too much upon you. You know what he was saying? You are too big in your own eyes. You aren't as big a leader as you think you are. And I'm just the guy who's going to cut you down to size. Who was Moses? He was nothing in Korah's eyes. He took too much upon himself, too much power, too much authority. He needed to be brought down to size. To further make the point, what does he say? Seeing all the congregation is holy, every one of them. You know what he's saying? You think you're better than us, Moses. You kind of put yourself in this position because you think you're better than all of us. You are no better than us. We can do whatever you're doing. You're not anything special. And boy, I'm telling you, his friends of verse number 1, they picked up on it and they went even further. They were more pointed and poignant in their attack on Moses and Aaron. Look at verse 13 and 14, would you? Verses 13 and 14 of the chapter. Here's what they said. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us? Moreover, thou hast not brought us into the land that floweth with milk and honey, or given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. He had sent word for them to come. You see that in previous verses, verse 12, Moses sent the call to them. Look at the verse again, the end of verse 13. Except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us. If you know anything about Moses, you know what you know? He was a reluctant leader, wasn't he? He didn't put himself in he didn't see no position. In fact, he told God, can't do it. No way. I can't talk. That's what he said, right? Send my brother, send somebody else. I can't do this. He was a reluctant leader all through this thing, and here they are, they're accusing him. Who do you think you are? You made yourself a prince over us. You brought us to you didn't bring us to the land that you promised of. You brought us to the wilderness. You have failed us in not getting us to that promised land. You don't deserve to stand in judgment of us. That's what they say at the end there. It's the blame game. Here's a typical sign of a rebel. Someone who excuses himself from doing what he's supposed to do by highlighting the failures of the one in authority. Such a blame game is a sure sign of the rebel. It was seen in the Garden of Eden with the rebellion of Adam and Eve. It was seen in the rebellion of Saul in 1 Samuel 15, where Samuel comes and says, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And it's seen in every other situation in which rebels are present. We attack the one in authority. We blame them for what doesn't please me. Don't be that person. In your family, don't be that person. Teenagers, don't blame your parents. Don't do it at work. Don't do it at church. Don't do it in the youth group, teenager. Don't do it at home. Don't do it at the school. Wherever you're found, don't be that rebel. The one that will attack the one in leadership and authority. Number 2, you know what else they do? They forget just how blessed they truly are. Man, this is so true. One of the sure signs of a rebel is discontentment to the degree they completely overlook how good they have it. You know what Moses does here? He tries to reason with them. He tries to come to them and say, whoa, don't you know how good you have it? Why are you rebelling? Why are you allowing this in your heart? Man, you have it so good. You're so blessed. And yet too many rebels are so discontent that they lose sight of how good they really have it, how blessed they are. Look at verse 8. Notice what Moses says to them. And Moses said unto Korah, hear, I pray you. Listen, reason with me, ye sons of Levi. Seemeth it but a small thing unto you, that the God of Israel hath separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation, to minister unto them. Verse 10. And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also? And you just see him saying, don't open your eyes. You are in a blessed position. And boy, you know what we are often reminded? just when we think we have it the worst, all we got to do is count our many blessings and we find out how good we do have it. And so often we fail at doing that. Man, teenager, you could find a lot to complain about at that camp, but there ought to be a lot of things you are saying, no, wait a minute, this is a blessing. I'm glad I get to go to camp. I'm glad I get to do this and this and this. Boy, be thankful. In your own family, well, you might be able to find some things, well, that family does that family does that family does that. Don't dwell on that. Dwell on the blessings that God has given you in your family. Count your many blessings. Because, man, when you don't, that just kind of opens the door to being a rebel, and eventually that rebellion will come out and you just kind of complaining about everything. You won't ever praise God for how good you do have it, the blessings that He has put in your hand and in your life. Boy, sadly, the rebellion went so far. It was too far settled in for this to make any difference. They didn't listen to Moses. But it's often the case with the rebel. Their eyes are closed to the reality of the situation, and they have a skewed perception of the situation in life. They don't see their blessings. All they can see is through their rebellion, their ambition, and their hurts. Letter C, you see what another sign influences others to think the same and act in the same way. Here's a good sign of a rebel. You ever hear the statement, misery loves company? Well, file this way along with it. Can I tell you, the rebel loves an audience. The rebel loves an audience. A rebel wants a crowd. He wants to plant that seed of rebellion in the heart of many as he can. In fact, I put it this way. He is often duped into thinking that the validation of his position is found in three things. Okay? A rebel will often look at these three things to validate what he's doing, to validate and justify his grievances and how he's attacking and so forth. Here's the validation. Number one, in the shared opinions of others. Can I just tell you right now, I don't care how many people share your opinion, unless God shares it, it's wrong. And that's biblical, okay? Unless it's God's, you're wrong. It doesn't matter how many people on Facebook agree with you. It doesn't matter how many people say, hey, yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, I think the same thing. Woo! That doesn't give you any validation. You better make sure your heart is right with God and that you're thinking what God says to think. It's in keeping with His Word. Number two, you know what else they look at? The size of the crowd of the sympathizers or comrades. Well, look at all the people I've convinced. Look at all the people that I've told my problems to, and they agree with me. And look at that. That doesn't validate anything. That doesn't validate anything. You know how many crazies out there still believe the world is flat? You come to me, Pastor Aaron, I believe the world's flat. You know how many people believe that? I don't care. Because it ain't. We throw that out. It validates it and shout, oh, look, wow, yeah, they're mad too. Who cares? That doesn't validate it. What does God say about it? That's validation. That's justification. And then number three, the damage he can cause. This is crazy to me. I hear rebels say, well, look at all the disruption we've caused and the chaos, and say that validates our point. That doesn't validate your point. What it validates is how harmful rebellion can be. It only shows and demonstrates. Here's what rebellion can cause, and the damage and the hurt and the pain. The fact that we come to the end of number 16 and nearly 15,000 people have died does not validate Korah and his friends. Not at all. But that is often what a rebel believes. You look at these verses real quick. Verse 3. And they gather themselves together to Moses and against Aaron and sent unto him, right? And they're gathering together. They're joining together. He's got his following, if we could put it this way, okay? My clicking's not working, so if you can maybe look at that and see what's going on. Thank you very much. There we go. Okay, then look at verse 5, first part. And he spake unto Korah and to all his company. What you see is verse 1 starts with just a few. Then it grows, 250. And then eventually, we read a moment ago, the whole congregation is with Korah. Look at verse number 19. Notice it. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them. Man, this thing has grown. We must be in the right. We must have a right grievance here, and we ought to be attacking this authority because, look, everybody is with us. You can just envision Korah there at the front of the group. His chest is puffed up. He thinks he's finally going to show Moses a thing or two. He has all these people on his side, and did you catch all the key words there? Against Moses, against Aaron, against them. He had incited a mob against those in leadership, against God, against the rules that have been laid down. And can I just tell you right now, that is a great place for us as Americans to realize something. There is a lesson being taught in our nation. It is this: be a loud enough rebel, one who refuses to do what they are told and follow the rules, but instead violently occupy places of authority. Make your dissenting voice heard loud and clear through your disruption, and we will listen to you, we will capitulate to your demands and your rebel-driven actions. And I'll tell you today, that is dead wrong. We ought not to do that as a nation. We ought not to do that as people in charge of any authority. That is dead wrong, because you know what we're teaching? We're teaching up-and-coming generations that they can be emboldened in their future actions, the rebellious actions. That's not how God deals with rebellion. That's not the way you cure it and help someone and speak to the heart and help them to understand. This is not how you handle these things. Yeah, this is the dangerous lesson we are teaching our nation, and frankly, too many parents are teaching it in their homes. They allow their children to rebel against their authority as parents, and my friend, we are turning out citizens who only know rebellion and don't know obedience. Submission and surrender. And man, I told you at the beginning of this message, it's a hard subject, but I'll tell you right now, it is biblical. It is right. This is not how God responds to the rebels in this passage. You see, the rebel loves to influence others. He loves to think and act the same way. He loves to get others, to think and act the same way, to influence them to do so. But he also does this, and we saw this in the case of specifically Dathan and Abiram. They refused to cooperate while displaying an obstinate attitude. We all could just say stubbornness, right? Even as the verse we looked at in 1 Samuel chapter 15, there's a stubborn. Look at verse 12. We read this a moment ago. Moses sent to call Dathan. He's in charge. God established him, and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, wait a minute, we will not come up. Then look at the end of verse 14. What did they say to Moses? We will not come up. We are told that Dathan and Abiram are refused to heed the command and call of Moses. This was likely a call to come appear before the leadership of Israel, perhaps to appear before Moses, the elders, whatever, the entrance of the temple. Whatever it was, they were obstinate. They refused to cooperate in order to deny his authority and leadership, refusing to obey, showing through their actions that was what was in their heart, rebellion. And boy, how we see that today. Teenager, can I just tell you right now, can I just encourage you this week, when Pastor Tony, Miss Diane ask you to do something, you ought not to ever resist that. You ought to trust their leadership. You ought to say, Pastor Tony, okay, if that's what you want to do, all right, maybe that's not what I wanted. Maybe I had another desire or something. You ought to trust their leadership, and you ought to obey. See, even here, Dathan and Abiram, even though they disagreed with Moses for some reason, they ought to have obeyed. They ought to have submitted to authority, but now the rebellion is full-blown. Now they are refusing to obey. They're refusing to do exactly what he's called them to do. The rebellion has showed up. How often we witness the same signs in the teen rebels and adult rebels. Why are we so concerned this morning with rebels? That there's a rebel in the camp? Well, my friend, it's because of the impact of a rebel, number 3. What are the impacts of a rebel? Number 1, letter A, they cause unnecessary frustration, heartache, and work for those in authority. Do you realize that in one of these verses we read a couple times that Moses has to fall on his face before God? This is the kind of event for someone in leadership that you talk about taking years off of their life. You talk about sleepless nights. You talk about health issues they have to deal with because of this situation. This is horrendously affecting the one in authority. If you are an authority, if you're a parent, have you ever lost sleep over your children? Problems maybe being caused as a pastor. You think I've ever lost sleep over things and situations? You think people in charge of a company or business have ever lost sleep over things happening among employee personnel issues? You better believe it. Better believe it. Moses and Aaron here, man, they are just affected greatly, and so it does. The rebel doesn't often understand what they cause the hurt, the frustration, the heartache, the work for those in authority. The only positive impact is that it demanded Aaron and Moses' reliance upon God. It drove them to depend upon God even more. Number 2, you know what else it does? It causes unrest and chaos while hindering the progress which should be occurring for the whole group. This was a huge distraction, for what was going on. It put a halt to everything else. Yeah, this is in the middle of Numbers, the putting into practice the Mosaic law, the teaching of it and so forth. That was put on hold. The proper worship of God was put on hold. The progress of the nation, the travels, all put on hold. It all came to a halt because of these rebels. And the same occurs in any home, any church, youth group, school, workplace where a rebel is found and is active. Letter C, third thing, collateral damage is both great and widespread. Look at verse 25 with me, if you will, quickly. Verse 25, and Moses rose up, he went unto Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, Depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. Verse 27, so they gat up from the tabernacle of Korah and Dathan and Abiram and on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out, stood in the door of their tents. Notice the collateral damage, and their wives, and their sons, and their little children. And Moses said, Hereby ye shall know that the Lord hath sent me to do all these works. For I have not done them of my own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, this is unprecedented, and the earth open her mouth, swallow them up with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. Verse 31, and it came to pass, as he made the end of speaking all these words, the ground clave asunder, it split, that was under them. The earth opened her mouth, swallowed them up and their houses and all that appertained unto Korah and all their goods. They and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them. For they said, Lest the earth swallow us up also. Verse 35. And there came out a fire from the Lord and consumed the 250 men that had offered the incense, the ones who had followed Korah and these guys at the beginning. Can I just tell you, that was one terrible day. It wasn't over. You talk about collateral damage. Can I tell you, all I can ever picture in this story is the families of those rebels. Families ruined and destroyed because of their rebellion. All the people gathered there, the 250 consumed by fire, and the devastation that would have wreaked on their families. These were men of renown. This would have been taken some time for the entire nation to recover from 250 of their leaders being consumed with fire because of rebellion that had gotten into their hearts, because it started in the heart of one person. And then all I can picture is the people gathered in that place. They're running like when you turn on the lights and the roaches and the mice run. They're running in great fear and trepidation because they think they're going to face the same fate. And the collateral damage did not stop there. Look very carefully, verse number 41. But on the morrow, this is the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, Ye have killed the people of the Lord. And it came to pass when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Are you kidding me? Listen carefully. Here's another impact of a rebellion. Cast a stumbling block before the ignorant and spiritually immature. The weak in faith. Here's who a rebel often affects the greatest, is someone who is spiritually ignorant, someone who is spiritually immature. And that's what happens here. Man, what a sad account. The very next day, the congregation turns on Moses and Aaron. They bring the wrath of God upon themselves. Verse 42, we just read it, says they gathered against Moses and Aaron. Now let me ask you this, Carrie, think about this. Who in their right spiritual mind, the very day after the ground swallows the rebel up, do you come and rebel against God and his leaders? I mean, really, who are you? What are you thinking? Wouldn't you at least give it a week? Wouldn't you at least give it a year? Didn't you learn anything? No, because here are some spiritually ignorant and immature people. And can I tell you, you know what happens often in a youth group, a church, a workplace? It is the spiritually immature and ignorant that are affected greatest by a rebel. Affected the greatest. Here it is. Hey, they come and say, you killed those people. What? Did you not see the sinkhole? Did you not see that Moses and Aaron standing over here, the fire coming? They didn't do this. It's done out of ignorance and spiritual immaturity. They're influenced by a rebel. This is the influence of a rebel. That's why it's so dangerous. This is why as a youth pastor, as a father, you're trying so hard to make sure rebellion isn't creeping up in the hearts of your kids, your teenagers. As a pastor, I don't want rebellion in any church member's heart because it is so devastating. It will ruin your family. It can affect a youth group. It can rule out everything that God can do at a week of camp. Don't be a rebel. Don't let the root of bitterness and the root of rebellion creep up. Look at verse 49. It's amazing. Verse 49. God sends a plague. I like the last statement of verse 42, right? The cloud covered, the glory of the Lord appeared. In other words, God showed up. You know what you say to that when you're a rebel? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Look at verse 49. Now they that died in the plague. We're not talking about the rebellion of Korah and his friends. Now, they that died in the plague that came because they challenged Moses were 14,700. Beside them that died after the matter of Korah. 15,000. Nearly 15,000 people in 2 days. All because of what? Rebellion. Don't you say, well, Pastor Henry, why'd you preach on rebellion? That's just hard. We don't need to hear that. Yes, we do. Because rebellion is harmful. It is dangerous. It hurts. It causes pain. It causes people to err from what is right. One of God's surest promises in the Scriptures is simply this: be sure your sin will find you out. Can I tell you right now, if you ever have the inclination to follow a rebel, to allow a little rebellion in your heart, I hope for just a moment you can hear the screams of Korah and his compatriots. That verse we just heard, you know what it said? They heard the cry of them. And they basically ran for their lives. But yet, how quickly that lesson was lost. Because the very next day, many of them had come back and blaming Moses and Aaron. Boy, if every day you and I could hear the cry, the screams of Korah and Dathan and Abiram and their families as they paid the devastating cost and price of rebellion. Be sure your sins will find you out. You see, what do we learn? The last point, clearly, the end of a rebel, that is always rightful judgment. Quickly, may I just put it this way? A rebel is always rebelling against God, ultimately. That never turns out well, does it? It only ends one way. You lose. You face judgment. Your only companions are regret and sorrow. And sadly, a rebel will often leave a trail of others affected and hurt by their rebellion. Choose rather to handle the situations in a right and biblical way as described in the Scriptures. There's ways, when you have grievances, when you have problems with those in authority, there are biblical methods and means by properly, biblically handling those things. Get in the Scriptures, find those out. But don't act like a rebel. So the encouragement today is simply this: guard against being a rebel this week. Teenager, you go to camp. Don't be a rebel. Guard against it. Look for the causes of rebellion, some that we have mentioned, others that are in the Scriptures. Make sure they don't develop in your heart and life. Look for the signs. Am I acting like a rebel? Am I acting like this at work, at church, in the youth group, at home, as a teenager, a child? Am I acting like a rebel? I don't want that. Look for those signs. Refuse to rebel in thought and action, and God's going to bless you for it. Purpose. Number 2, purpose to not be a rebel. Avoid holding on to things that cause you to be a rebel. Avoid the friendships with rebels so that it does not impact you. Maybe you're here today and you're honest and you say, you know what, Pastor Henry, if I'm honest, there's already some seeds of rebellion growing. There's already some things that, boy, if I give way to them, they're going to cause me to be a rebel. And you've entertained them in your heart right now. If you don't deal with it, you're going to turn into a rebel. Can I just tell you today, listen carefully. I want you to be on today. I want you to be on today. You say, Pastor Henry, have you lost your mind? No, I want you to be on today. Look back at verse number 1, would you? Look at verse number 1. Chapter 16, verse number 1. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan, and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took men. Now jump down to verse 12. And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. Korah's already there. He goes to send to call Dathan and Abiram, which said, we will not come up. Who's missing? On. O-N. Got it? Verse number 1, we had On with the group. He's not here in verse number 12. Jump down, verse number 27. Look here. Verse 27. So they gat up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side. Who's missing? Okay, we probably should have a little bit more participation that time since I gave you the answer. Okay, so let's try this again. Who's missing in that verse? On, right? He's missing. Now, wait a minute. He's in verse 1. He's not in verse 12. He's not in verse 27. Here's what's interesting, okay? I'm not going to read between the lines, but here's what's interesting. He's not mentioned anywhere else. Now, interestingly, among the Jewish tradition, among the rabbinical teachings, you know what they teach? That On went to this first meeting with Moses, and he listened to what Moses said, and his heart was convicted. His heart was convicted. And so he walked away. I don't want to be like that. Moses is right. Man, I need to be content with what I have. I need to count my blessings. Why are we doing this, guys? Why are we doing this? I don't want to be like that. I don't face that. And boy, could you imagine what he was going through as all of this transpired in Numbers 16? Whew. I sure am thankful that I'm no longer with them. Can I ask you today, you got any roots? Roots of rebellion? Roots of bitterness? Best thing you can do today is get rid of those roots. Teenager, listen to me. I often think camp ought to start here at these services. Ought to be quiet if you're going to camp. You're here because camp revival ought to start today by getting rid of some roots. Cut them out. Throw them out. Confess it. Forsake it. Walk away from it. Avoid the judgment that will surely come. Are you the rebel in the camp? Father, we thank you.